A 6-year-old boy ran desperately into a hospital, carrying a girl in his arms and shouting, "It was my father who did this." When the police arrived at his house, everyone was shocked. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was a whirlwind of movement that night. Nurses darted between patients, their white sneakers squeaking against the polished floors. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors filled the air, blending with the low murmur of worried families waiting for news. Doctors in scrubs moved with practiced urgency, tending to those who clung to the edge of consciousness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark glow over the controlled chaos. Then, amid all the usual noise and commotion, came a new sound, one that silenced everything for a fraction of a second. Small, hurried footsteps echoed through the hall, growing louder with each desperate stride. A boy, no older than 6, burst through the hospital's automatic doors, his tiny arms wrapped around the frail body of a little girl. His face was streaked with dirt, his blonde hair disheveled, and his chest heaved as he struggled to carry her. His voice, shrill and broken with terror, sliced through the air like a blade. "Help! Please, someone help!" he screamed, his words tumbling over each other. "It was my dad. He did this. He hurt her." For a single moment, everything seemed to freeze. The receptionist at the front desk stared, her fingers frozen above her keyboard. A nurse who had been speaking to a patient turned sharply, eyes widening in alarm. An older man in the waiting area lowered his newspaper, his mouth slightly open. Then, suddenly, everything moved at once. A nurse rushed forward, her hands outstretched as she carefully took the unconscious girl from the boy's trembling arms. The child's body was limp, her dark curls matted with blood at the back of her head. Her tiny hands, covered in scratches, dangled lifelessly at her sides. "Get a stretcher now," the nurse shouted over her shoulder, already hurrying toward the trauma unit. The boy, left standing alone in the middle of the waiting area, staggered slightly, his small hands twitching at his sides. His breaths came in short, uneven gasps, as though he had been running for miles. His legs wobbled, exhaustion catching up to him now that the weight of his sister was gone. A doctor in blue scrubs knelt in front of him, speaking softly but firmly. "Son, I need you to take a deep breath. Can you tell me your name?" The boy's lips trembled, his big brown eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Ethan," he whispered hoarsely. "And my sister. Her name is Lily." The doctor nodded, glancing toward the doors where the nurses had disappeared with Lily. "Okay, Ethan. You did the right thing bringing her here. We're going to take care of her, I promise. But I need you to help me, all right? Where's your mom?" At the mention of his mother, Ethan's entire body tensed. His shoulders hunched, his fingers curled into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white. I don't know," he murmured, shaking his head rapidly. His breathing quickened again, panic rising to the surface. Dad was yelling. He was so mad. Then he pushed Lily and she hit the wall. His voice caught, and for a brief moment he looked even smaller than he already was. And Mom, she was screaming. His voice trailed off into a whisper, the memory choking him. The doctor clenched his jaw. There was no doubt now. This was no accident. He turned toward the nearest nurse. "Call the police. Right now." Less than 10 minutes later, 2 officers in dark uniforms stepped through the hospital's glass doors. They were given a quick summary of the situation, but they hardly needed to hear more before making their way back outside. Their real destination lay elsewhere, the Reynolds residence. And when they finally arrived and pushed open that front door, none of them were prepared for what they would find inside. The Reynolds house stood at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by the thick silence of the night. The porch light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the darkness. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as the wind nudged it back and forth. Detective David Carter stepped out of the patrol car, adjusting the strap of his holster as he exchanged a wary glance with his partner. The air around them was heavy, charged with the kind of tension that usually signaled something was very, very wrong. "Something doesn't feel right," his partner, Officer Mitchell, muttered under his breath. David didn't respond. He simply placed a firm hand on the door and pushed it open. The hinges groaned, the sound stretching through the silence like a warning. As they stepped inside, the first thing they noticed was the smell, a thick, nauseating mix of alcohol, sweat, and something else beneath it, something stale and rotten. The living room was in shambles. A coffee table lay overturned, its glass top shattered across the hardwood floor. Beer bottles, some still dripping with their last drops of liquor, littered every surface. The couch cushions had been thrown aside, and on the far wall, a dented spot in the plaster stood out like a wound. A few dark smears stained the floor beneath it. But the worst part, the part that made David's stomach clench, was the man slumped on the couch. John Reynolds, the father. He was barely conscious, sprawled across the cushions with one arm dangling toward the floor. His shirt was stained with old sweat, his jeans wrinkled as though he hadn't changed in days. His fingers twitched slightly, his breath coming in slow, uneven gasps. On the coffee table beside him lay a mess of syringes, pill bottles, and an empty whiskey bottle. "Shit," Mitchell muttered. "He's out cold. Might be an overdose." David's gaze swept over the scene before landing on something tucked beside the couch. Small, pink sneakers, barely peeking out from behind the armrest. His chest tightened. "Check the rest of the house," he ordered, his voice tense. Mitchell nodded and hurried down the hall, his boots crunching over the broken glass. David, meanwhile, stepped closer to the unconscious man, his instincts on high alert. "John Reynolds," he called out, his tone firm but controlled. "Wake up." No response. David reached out, giving the man's shoulder a rough shake. At first, nothing happened, but then John let out a low groan, his eyelids fluttering as he stirred. "Wha?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath. His unfocused eyes struggled to settle on David's face. "John Reynolds, you're in serious trouble," David informed him. "Your kids, Ethan and Lily, were found at the hospital. Your son says you're the one who hurt them." John blinked slowly, his brow furrowing. Then, suddenly, his entire body tensed. His eyes darted wildly around the room, as if searching for something or someone. "Where's Lily?" he slurred. David's expression darkened. "She's in the hospital, and she might not wake up." John let out a breathless laugh, one that carried no humor. He rubbed a hand over his face, fingers shaking. I didn't mean." His words stumbled over themselves, colliding with the weight of whatever was clawing at his brain. "It was an accident. She got in the way." David's jaw tightened. "Got in the way of what?" Before John could answer, Mitchell's voice echoed from the hallway, sharp with urgency. "David, you need to see this." David moved quickly, leaving John slumped on the couch as he followed the sound of his partner's voice. Mitchell was standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, his flashlight illuminating something inside. And when David stepped past him and saw what lay beyond that door, his breath caught in his throat. This was worse than anything they had expected. The master bedroom smelled of something stale, like sweat and neglect. The air was thick, heavy, carrying the weight of whatever horrors had unfolded there. Detective David Carter stood frozen in the doorway, his flashlight casting a pale beam over the wreckage inside. The bed was unmade, its sheets twisted into a mess of fabric. The lamp on the nightstand lay shattered, the bulb flickering faintly where it had fallen. But it wasn't the chaos that made David's pulse spike, it was the blood. A deep crimson stain darkened the beige carpet near the foot of the bed. Not fresh, but not old enough to be forgotten. Beside it, a woman's scarf, torn and crumpled, lay abandoned. Mitchell let out a slow, measured breath. "Jesus Christ!" he muttered. David's stomach clenched. He stepped further into the room, his boots careful to avoid the bloodstain. His eyes scanned every corner, looking for what he already knew might be there. And then he saw it. Half hidden behind the bed, as if someone had tried to shove it out of sight, was a body. The woman lay still, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath her. Her dark brown hair was matted, strands clinging to the dried blood at her temple. Her face, bruised and pale, was frozen in an expression of something between pain and fear. David swallowed hard. "It's her," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's their mom." David knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. He held his breath, waiting, hoping there. A pulse. Weak, but there. "She's alive," he barked, already reaching for his radio. "We need paramedics in here now." The response was immediate. Within moments, sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the quiet of the neighborhood like a warning. Behind them, a hoarse laugh echoed from the living room. David turned sharply, his heart still pounding. He stormed back down the hall, his fists clenching at his sides. John Reynolds was still slumped on the couch, but now his shoulders shook with silent laughter. His bloodshot eyes met David's, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "She's not dead, huh?" His voice was slurred, thick with whatever mix of substances was swimming through his system. "Guess I didn't hit her hard enough." David saw red. He grabbed John by the collar, yanking him up from the couch with enough force to knock over the empty whiskey bottle beside him. "You son of a bitch," he growled. "You beat your wife unconscious, threw your daughter against a wall, and left your 6-year-old son to fend for himself." He shoved him back down onto the couch, breathing hard. "And you think this is funny?" John coughed, still smirking. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "I take care of my family." David's jaw tightened. "Yeah?" he said coldly. "Tell that to your son. The one who carried his sister through the streets because he thought she was dying. The one who ran into a hospital screaming that his own father did this." John's smirk faltered. For the first time since they arrived, something like fear flickered across his face. Then, without warning, he lunged. His movements were sluggish, impaired by drugs, exhaustion, or both, but he was still strong. He reached for David's belt, fingers scrabbling toward his gun. "Don't even think about it," Mitchell barked. In a swift motion, David shoved John off of him, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Before he could make another move, Mitchell was on him, pinning his arms behind his back. "John Reynolds, you're under arrest for domestic violence, child endangerment, and attempted murder." The officer's voice was steady, firm. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say," John thrashed, cursing, but his strength was fading fast. By the time paramedics arrived, he was already in cuffs. As they wheeled his wife out on a stretcher, David looked away, his jaw set. He thought of Ethan, of the little boy sitting in a hospital hallway, still shaking, still waiting. And suddenly, David knew one thing for certain. That kid deserved better. Ethan sat on a stiff plastic chair in the hospital hallway, his small hands gripping the worn fabric of his sleeves. His legs dangled above the floor, too short to reach it, swinging slightly as he tried to keep himself from shaking. The hospital smelled weird, like something too clean, mixed with something metallic. He didn't like it. The nurses had given him a juice box, but it sat untouched on the seat beside him. He didn't feel thirsty. He didn't feel anything except cold, even though the hospital wasn't cold at all. He kept staring down at his shoes, muddy, scuffed sneakers that had once been white. There was a stain on them. Dark red. He squeezed his eyes shut. Maybe if he kept them closed long enough, he could pretend none of this was real. But then a voice, soft and gentle, broke through the heavy silence. "Ethan." Slowly, he lifted his head. A woman knelt in front of him, her eyes kind but serious. She had dark hair pulled into a ponytail and wore a long beige coat over her clothes. She wasn't a doctor. She didn't have the same hurried, tired look that everyone else in the hospital had. "My name is Hannah," she said. "I'm here to help, okay?" Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure if she expected him to. Hannah sat down on the chair next to him, not too close, not too far. "I know you've had a really scary night," she continued. "But you were so brave, Ethan. You helped your sister when she needed you the most. That makes you a hero." A hero. The words felt strange. Heroes were strong. Heroes weren't scared. Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. "Can you tell me what happened?" Hannah asked gently. For a long moment, he said nothing. The words were stuck, tangled in his chest like something sharp and heavy. Hannah waited. She didn't rush him. Finally, his lips parted, and his voice, small and broken, came out. He was yelling. Hannah nodded, encouraging him. "Who was yelling?" Ethan stared at the floor. "Dad." A pause. "And then what happened?" His fingers twisted into the hem of his shirt. Mom was crying. Lily was crying too. She was scared. His breathing hitched, but he kept going, his voice barely above a whisper. He grabbed Mom. He pushed her. She hit the wall, and then she wasn't moving. Hannah's expression remained calm, but Ethan noticed the way her hands curled slightly into fists. "And Lily?" she prompted. His stomach twisted. "She tried to help Mom," he said. "She grabbed Dad's arm and said to stop." A tear slipped down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. He didn't like that. Hannah took a slow breath. "What did he do, Ethan?" His hands balled into fists. "He threw her," he choked. "She hit the wall and didn't wake up. I thought—" his voice broke. "I thought she was dead." The memory slammed into him all over again. Lily so still. Her head bleeding. The way her arms had flopped like a doll's when he picked her up. He sucked in a sharp breath, trying to push it away. Hannah placed a gentle hand on his arm, her voice steady. "You did everything you could, Ethan. You saved her." Ethan didn't feel like he had saved anyone. He felt like he had run. Like a coward. "Where's my mom?" he whispered suddenly. Hannah hesitated. "She's in the hospital," she answered carefully. "The doctors are taking care of her." "Is she okay?" The hesitation was longer this time. Ethan's heart pounded. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," Hannah admitted. "But I promise you, she's in the best hands." Ethan clenched his jaw, staring hard at the floor. He hated not knowing. He hated feeling like everything was out of his control. A movement near the end of the hallway caught his eye. 2 police officers had arrived, their dark uniforms making them look big and serious. One of them was talking to a nurse, while the other, a tall man with sharp eyes, was scanning the room. Then his gaze landed on Ethan, and something in his face softened. The officer approached, kneeling down to Ethan's level just like Hannah had. "Hey, buddy," he said. His voice was calmer than Ethan expected. "I'm Detective Carter. I just came from your house." Ethan tensed. "We found your dad," Carter continued. "He's been arrested. He can't hurt you or Lily anymore." The words should have made Ethan feel better. But they didn't. Because in his mind he could still hear his father's voice, slurred and angry. Still feel the weight of his footsteps, shaking the floorboards. Still see the moment Lily's head hit the wall. Hannah noticed the way his breathing changed, the way his hands gripped his sleeves even tighter. "You're safe now, Ethan," she said softly. "You and Lily are safe." Safe. The word felt foreign. He wasn't sure if he even knew what it meant anymore. The small room where Ethan sat was quiet now, except for the faint hum of voices and the occasional beep from the machines beyond the hallway. The hospital still felt too big, too bright, too unfamiliar. He kept his arms wrapped tightly around himself, as if squeezing hard enough would make him disappear. Hannah was still beside him. She hadn't left. That was strange. Grown-ups always left eventually. But she sat there, waiting, as if she knew that too many words at once would only make it worse. After what felt like forever, Detective Carter returned. His heavy footsteps slowed as he approached. Ethan didn't look up right away, but he felt the man kneel beside him again. "Lily is stable," Carter said, his voice calm, steady. "She's sleeping, but the doctors say she's strong. They're going to take good care of her." Ethan sucked in a shaky breath, his fingers tightening in the fabric of his shirt. "And my mom?" Carter hesitated. "She's in surgery, Ethan. The doctors are doing everything they can." Surgery. The word made his stomach twist. His mom hated hospitals. She used to say the smell alone made her want to run away. But now she was here, just like Lily. And Ethan didn't know if she would wake up. His chest tightened. Carter must have noticed, because he spoke again, softer this time. "I know this is a lot, buddy. But I need to ask you something important, okay?" Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't want to talk anymore. Talking only made everything more real. But Carter wasn't like the other grown-ups. He didn't push. So Ethan gave a small, almost invisible nod. Carter shifted slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "Do you have anyone else, Ethan? Someone who takes care of you when your mom can't?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean? Grandparents? Aunts? Uncles? Anyone who could take you in?" The question made Ethan's stomach sink. He shook his head. It was just us. His mom. His sister. And him. His dad had never really been part of that. Not in the way that mattered. Carter and Hannah exchanged a look. Not the kind that people thought kids didn't notice, but the kind where grown-ups were trying to figure out what to do next. Ethan didn't like it. "What's gonna happen to me and Lily?" he asked, his voice small. Hannah leaned in a little. "Right now, you need a safe place to stay," she said. "Somewhere you can rest, where we can make sure you're okay." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "You mean a foster home?" Hannah hesitated. "Maybe, for a little while. But we're going to make sure you and Lily stay together, all right?" Ethan wasn't sure he believed that. He'd heard about foster homes. Kids got separated all the time. His stomach felt tight again. "I just want to see Lily," he muttered. Hannah nodded. "I know, sweetheart. And you will very soon." Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There might be another option," he said finally. "A family that could take care of you both. Just for now." Ethan blinked. "Who?" "A couple named Oliver and Claire Bennett. They've been trying to adopt for a while, and Hannah knows them well. They're good people." Hannah smiled gently. "They're kind, Ethan. And they have a warm, safe home." Ethan's chest ached. He didn't want a different home. He wanted his home. Even if it was messy, even if it was small, even if it still smelled like his dad's cologne, no matter how many times his mom tried to clean it away. But his home wasn't safe anymore. Maybe it never had been. His fingers dug into his sleeves again. "I just want to be with Lily," he whispered. Hannah reached out, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You will be, Ethan. I promise." But promises didn't mean much, because people broke them all the time. Ethan had never spent a night away from home before. Even when things got bad, when his dad's yelling turned into broken plates and his mom tried to make her voice sound steady, even though Ethan knew she was scared, he had always been in his own bed, in his own room, with Lily just across the hall. But now, everything was different. The ride to the Bennetts' house was quiet. Ethan sat in the back seat of Hannah's car, staring out the window as the city lights passed by. He barely blinked, his fingers still gripping the hem of his shirt like it was the only thing keeping him together. Hannah had tried to talk to him, asking if he was hungry, if he was cold, if he wanted to listen to some music, but Ethan had just shaken his head each time. Nothing felt right. The houses started getting bigger the further they drove, the sidewalks cleaner, the lawns greener. The Bennetts' home was at the end of a cul-de-sac, warm porch lights casting a soft glow over the neatly trimmed hedges and the stone path leading up to the front door. It looked nice. Too nice. Like a house from a Christmas movie. Not like somewhere he belonged. Hannah parked the car and turned to him with a reassuring smile. "We're here, sweetheart. Oliver and Claire are inside, waiting to meet you." Ethan hesitated, his hands tightening into fists on his lap. He didn't want to meet new people. He didn't want another house, another set of rules, another place where he didn't fit. He wanted his mom to wake up. He wanted Lily to be okay. He wanted everything to go back to the way it was before. But there was no before anymore. Slowly, he unbuckled his seatbelt, his movements stiff, mechanical. Hannah opened the car door for him, and he stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway. The night air was cool, crisp, and somewhere in the distance he could hear crickets chirping. Hannah led him up the stone path and rang the doorbell. The sound was soft but echoed in Ethan's chest like a drumbeat. A moment later, the door opened. The woman standing in the doorway had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wore a sweater that looked soft, like something his mom used to wear when she made hot chocolate on cold nights. "Hi, Ethan," she said warmly. "I'm Claire. It's really nice to meet you." Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at her, unsure of what he was supposed to say. A man stepped up beside her, Oliver. He was tall, with dark hair that was beginning to gray at the edges. He smiled, but not in the way adults did when they were trying too hard. It was softer, quieter. "Hey, buddy," he said. "We've got a room all set up for you. No pressure, though. You can take your time, all right?" Ethan swallowed hard. Something about the way they spoke, careful, measured, made him feel even more out of place. Like he was something fragile, something they were afraid to break. Claire stepped aside, giving him space to enter. Hannah placed a comforting hand on his back, guiding him gently forward. The house smelled like vanilla and something warm, maybe cinnamon. It wasn't an unfamiliar smell, but it felt wrong somehow. Too different from home. The living room was cozy, with a big couch and shelves filled with books. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, and there was a framed picture of Claire and Oliver on the mantel, both of them laughing at something just out of view. It looked like a happy place. Ethan wasn't sure what happiness felt like anymore. "You must be tired," Claire said gently. "Would you like to see your room?" Ethan shrugged, not trusting his voice. Claire led him down a hallway, stopping at a door near the end. She pushed it open, revealing a small, comfortable space. The bed was neatly made with dark blue blankets, and a nightlight shaped like a star glowed softly in the corner. There was a dresser, a bookshelf, and a window overlooking the quiet street outside. It didn't look like a kid's room. It looked temporary. Like a place made for someone who wasn't meant to stay. Ethan hovered in the doorway, staring at the bed. He felt frozen. "I know this is a lot," Claire said, her voice soft. "But you don't have to do anything tonight except rest. If you need anything, Oliver and I will be right down the hall." Ethan hesitated before stepping inside. Claire gave him one last reassuring smile before closing the door halfway, leaving it slightly open, like she knew he wouldn't want to be completely alone. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do. His chest felt tight again, his hands trembling at his sides. His feet ached from running earlier, but he didn't want to sit down. Instead, he walked to the bed and sank onto the mattress, his arms wrapping tightly around himself. For a long time, he just sat there, staring at the wall. Then, slowly, he leaned over and pulled off his shoes. That's when he saw it. The stain. Dark red. His breath hitched, and suddenly the room was too small, the air too thick. The memory slammed into him. The sound of Lily's head hitting the wall, the way her tiny body had gone limp in his arms, the smell of blood and sweat and fear. His hands trembled violently as he pressed them to his eyes, trying to push it all away. But he couldn't. He didn't know how. A soft knock on the door made him jolt. Ethan. It was Claire. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice not to break. A moment later, the door creaked open just enough for her to step inside. She didn't come too close. She simply knelt down near the bed, her voice gentle. "I know everything feels scary right now," she said. "And I know nothing about this feels like home. But you're not alone, sweetheart. You don't have to be scared here." Ethan swallowed hard. She didn't understand. He was alone. Because Lily wasn't here. And as long as Lily wasn't here, nothing would ever feel safe. Days passed in a blur of whispered conversations, hushed voices in the hall, and the distant hum of the world continuing beyond the walls of the Bennet's house. Ethan barely spoke. He ate when Claire placed food in front of him. He nodded when Oliver asked if he was okay, but beyond that, he remained silent. He spent most of his time in his room, sitting by the window, staring outside. The cul-de-sac was quiet, the houses neat and perfect, but it didn't feel real to him. It was like a painting, pretty, but distant. At night, sleep was a stranger. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet crackling of the fireplace downstairs. His thoughts spun endlessly, memories flashing in his mind no matter how hard he tried to push them away. The sound of his father's voice, sharp and slurred. The way Lily's little hands had reached out for help before she fell. The way his mother had stopped screaming so suddenly. But the worst part wasn't the memories. The worst part was the waiting. Waiting for a phone call. For news. For someone to tell him what would happen next. Then, on the 5th day, Hannah arrived. Ethan was in the kitchen, pushing pieces of toast around his plate, when he heard the soft knock at the door. His stomach clenched immediately, his hands freezing mid-motion. Claire gave him a quick glance before getting up to answer. When she opened the door, Hannah stepped inside, her coat dusted with morning frost. She smiled at Claire, then at Oliver, then at Ethan. "Hi, sweetheart," she said gently. "Can we talk for a little bit?" Ethan nodded stiffly, his fingers curling around the edges of the table. Claire placed a comforting hand on his shoulder before stepping aside, giving them space. Hannah sat down across from him, folding her hands on the wooden surface between them. "I have news about Lily," she said carefully. Ethan's heart pounded so hard it hurt. "She woke up," Hannah continued, her voice soft but warm. "She's a little weak, but the doctors say she's going to be okay." For a moment, Ethan forgot how to breathe. His whole body tensed, as if the world had suddenly shifted beneath him. Lily was awake. She was okay. Something inside him cracked wide open, something that had been wound so tight for days that he hadn't even realized it was there. His breath shuddered out of him, and before he could stop it, a tear slipped down his cheek. "She's okay," he whispered, barely believing it. Hannah nodded. "She's been asking about you. That did it." Ethan pushed back his chair so fast that it scraped against the floor. "I want to see her." His voice was hoarse but determined. Hannah hesitated, glancing at Claire and Oliver. "You will," she promised. "Very soon. But there's something else I need to tell you first." Ethan's stomach twisted again. The way Hannah's voice changed, the way her face softened, told him immediately that this wasn't good news. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "Your mom is still in the hospital," Hannah said carefully. "She's stable, but she's not awake yet. The doctors don't know when she will be." Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. The world around him suddenly felt too sharp, too bright. His mom was still asleep, still gone. His breath came faster, his chest rising and falling too quickly, his fingers shaking before he clenched them even tighter. Lily was awake, but his mom wasn't, and no one knew when she would be, or if she ever would. Hannah must have noticed the way his shoulders tensed because she reached out, resting a gentle hand over his. "Ethan," she said softly, "you are not alone in this. You have people who care about you, people who want to help. You and Lily are going to be safe." Safe. That word again. It felt like a lie. He had thought his mom would always be there to protect them. And now she was trapped somewhere he couldn't reach, lost in a sleep that might never end. Ethan clenched his jaw. "When can I see Lily?" he asked, his voice tight. Hannah studied him for a moment, her eyes full of something that looked like understanding. "Right now, if you want to." Ethan stood so fast that his chair nearly tipped over. He didn't care about anything else. His mom wasn't here. But Lily was. And as long as he still had her, maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone. The hospital looked different this time. The first time Ethan had been here, he had been running, gasping for breath, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break his ribs. That night had been a blur of bright lights, shouting voices, and the crushing fear that he had lost Lily forever. But now, as he followed Hannah down the quiet hallway, everything felt slower, heavier. He could hear his own footsteps against the cold floor, feel the scratchy hospital gown of a passing patient brush against his arm. The walls smelled like antiseptic and something too clean, and the beeping of distant monitors echoed through the stillness. Hannah stopped outside a door. Ethan froze. His palms were sweaty, his stomach twisting painfully, but he forced himself to look up at her. "She's right inside," Hannah said gently. "Take your time." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped forward and pushed the door open. Lily was so small in the hospital bed. Her tiny frame was swallowed by the white sheets, her dark curls tangled against the pillow. A thin bandage wrapped around her head, and an IV snaked from her hand to one of the machines beside her. For a split second, Ethan's chest squeezed so tight he couldn't breathe. She looked so fragile, so breakable. But then, her eyes fluttered open, and the moment she saw him, her face lit up. "Ethan!" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but it was the best sound Ethan had ever heard. He moved before he realized what he was doing, rushing to her bedside and grabbing her small hand in both of his. "You're awake," he breathed, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. "You're okay." Lily blinked sleepily. "I was looking for you," she mumbled, squeezing his fingers weakly. "Where did you go?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I didn't go anywhere," he whispered. "I'm right here." Lily's lips trembled, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. "I thought Daddy got you too." The word sent a sharp, aching pain through Ethan's chest. He forced a smile, even though it felt shaky. "He didn't," he promised. "And he's never going to hurt us again." Lily stared at him for a long moment, her small fingers curling around his as if she were making sure he was real. Then, finally, she gave a tiny nod. "Okay," she whispered. Ethan sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand. "Are you hurting?" he asked carefully. Lily's nose scrunched up in thought. "A little," she admitted. "My head feels funny." Ethan swallowed hard. "The doctors said you're gonna be okay," he reassured her. "You just have to rest for a little while." Lily nodded sleepily. She looked so tired, her eyes drooping, her breathing slow and steady. Ethan didn't let go of her hand, even when her grip loosened. He just sat there, watching her, making sure she didn't disappear. After a few minutes, her breathing evened out, and Ethan realized she had fallen asleep again. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Because for the first time in days, something inside him felt a little lighter. She was here. She was safe. And for now, that was enough. Ethan wasn't sure how long he sat there, his fingers still wrapped around Lily's small hand. Time in the hospital moved differently, slow and heavy, like wading through deep water. He barely noticed when the door opened again. Claire stepped inside, her voice soft. "Hey, sweetheart." Ethan blinked, his mind sluggish, his body stiff from sitting so still. He looked at Claire, then back at Lily, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. Claire knelt beside him, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She's okay, Ethan. She just needs rest." Ethan swallowed hard. His throat was tight, dry. He knew Claire was trying to help, but she didn't understand. Lily was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. If he let go, even for a second, he might lose everything again. Claire seemed to sense his hesitation. "You can stay as long as you want," she assured him. "But I brought you something, just in case you get hungry." Ethan looked down and realized she was holding a brown paper bag. The smell of warm bread and melted cheese drifted through the air. Grilled cheese. His chest tightened. His mom used to make grilled cheese for him and Lily on rainy days, cutting them into little triangles, telling them that the corners made the bites taste better. For a moment, he thought he might cry. But he didn't. Instead, he just nodded. Claire placed the bag beside him, squeezing his shoulder gently before stepping back. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." Ethan didn't answer. He waited until she left before carefully opening the bag. The sandwich was still warm. He took a small bite, barely tasting it, but the familiar texture was enough to ground him, even if only for a moment. Lily stood beside him, letting out a soft whimper. Ethan immediately set the sandwich down, leaning closer. Her eyelashes fluttered as she slowly blinked awake. "Ethan, I'm here," he whispered. Lily's fingers twitched weakly against his. "I had a bad dream," she murmured, her voice groggy. Ethan's throat tightened. "Me too." Lily's brows furrowed slightly, as if trying to remember something. Then, suddenly, her eyes filled with worry. "Where's Mommy?" Ethan's breath caught. For a second, he didn't know what to say. How could he tell her? How could he say the words out loud when he could barely think them himself? Lily's tiny fingers curled around his. "Ethan?" she asked again, her voice smaller this time. He swallowed the lump in his throat and forced himself to speak. "Mom's still sleeping," he said carefully. "The doctors are taking care of her." Lily stared at him, searching his face for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe the truth. "When will she wake up?" Ethan's chest ached. He didn't know the answer. No one did. But Lily was looking at him like he was supposed to have one. So he lied. "Soon." Lily's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded. "Okay." Ethan let out a slow breath, his grip on her hand tightening just slightly. They sat there in silence, the machines beeping softly around them, the weight of everything too heavy for words. But for now, at least, they were together. And that was all that mattered. The days that followed felt like a blur, filled with quiet hospital visits and whispered conversations Ethan wasn't supposed to hear. He and Lily weren't allowed in the intensive care unit where their mom was being treated, but he caught bits and pieces of updates from the nurses when they thought he wasn't listening. Stable. No change. Still unconscious. The words repeated over and over, blending together until they didn't mean anything at all. Ethan hated it. Lily, still weak from her injury, had been moved to a regular hospital room. She spent most of her time asleep, her little body still healing. When she was awake, she asked for their mother. Ethan always told her the same thing: she'll wake up soon. He didn't know if it was true, but he needed Lily to believe it, because if she believed it, maybe he could too. On the morning of their final court hearing, Hannah arrived at the Bennetts' house earlier than usual. Ethan knew what the meeting was about. He and Lily weren't going back home. They couldn't. Their father was in jail, and their mother wasn't waking up. Oliver and Claire had offered to take them in, to be their family. But the choice wasn't Ethan's to make. It was the judge's. Claire helped him find a dress shirt that didn't feel too stiff, buttoning it up with careful hands. Oliver sat beside him on the couch, his voice steady but gentle as he explained what would happen in court. The judge will ask some questions, Ethan. It's okay if you don't have all the answers. Just tell the truth. The truth. Ethan wasn't sure he even knew what that was anymore. The courtroom felt too big, too serious. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and the air smelled like old paper and something faintly metallic. Lily sat beside him, her legs too short to reach the floor. She clung to Claire's hand, her wide eyes darting around the room. The judge was an older man with silver-rimmed glasses and deep lines around his mouth. His expression wasn't unkind, but it was unreadable, which somehow made Ethan more nervous. The hearing went by in pieces. Hannah spoke first, then Oliver and Claire. The words blurred together, but Ethan caught phrases that made his chest tighten. Unfit parent. History of domestic violence. Emergency protective custody. Then, suddenly, the judge was looking right at him. "Ethan," he said, his voice deep but not unkind, "do you understand what's happening today?" Ethan nodded stiffly. The judge studied him for a moment. "And do you want to stay with the Bennetts?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He could feel everyone watching him. Hannah, Claire, Oliver, even Lily. His hands clenched into fists in his lap. He didn't know what he wanted. He wanted his mother to wake up. He wanted to go back to a time before his father turned into a monster. He wanted things he couldn't have. So he settled for the only thing that mattered. He reached for Lily's hand, squeezing it tightly before looking the judge in the eye. "I want to be with my sister." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the judge exhaled through his nose, nodding as if that was all he needed to hear. He turned to Oliver and Claire. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, are you ready to be parents to these children? Not just today, but always." Oliver reached for Claire's hand, his eyes shining with something Ethan didn't quite understand. "Always," Oliver said. "We've been ready for a long time." Claire smiled, squeezing his hand. The judge nodded once, then picked up his gavel. "Then it's decided. Ethan and Lily Reynolds are now under the permanent guardianship of Oliver and Claire Bennett." The gavel struck the desk with a dull thud. It was over. Ethan's chest felt strange, tight and light at the same time, like he had been holding his breath for too long. Lily turned to Claire, wrapping her arms around her waist, burying her face against her sweater. Claire kissed the top of her head, whispering something too soft for Ethan to hear. Oliver placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, firm but warm. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, kiddo." Ethan wanted to believe that. He really did. But somewhere deep inside, fear still clung to him. Because his mom was still asleep. And part of him was terrified she might never wake up. The days that followed the court ruling were quiet. Too quiet. Ethan and Lily had a new home now. A new family. But even though Oliver and Claire tried their best to make things feel normal, nothing about this felt real. Their new room was bigger than the one they had shared before. The walls weren't cracked, and the windows didn't let in the cold air when it was windy. The bed was soft, the blankets warm, and the floor didn't creak under their footsteps. It was a nice home. Safe. But it wasn't home. Because home had her. And she was still gone. 1 week after the ruling, Hannah showed up at the Bennett's house earlier than expected. Ethan knew something was wrong the second he saw her face. His stomach twisted painfully as she sat across from him and Lily, her hands folded together tightly. "Sweetheart, I have news about your mom," she said carefully. Ethan felt Lily tense beside him. His fingers curled into the fabric of his jeans, his heart pounding. "Did she?" His voice cracked before he could finish. Hannah smiled gently. She woke up. Everything around him blurred. His vision swam, his ears buzzed, his heartbeat pounded so loudly that he could barely hear anything else. She was awake. She was alive. The breath he hadn't realized he was holding came out in a rush, his chest aching from the force of it. He felt Lily clutch his sleeve, her tiny fingers twisting into the fabric. "Can we see her?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. Hannah nodded. "She's still very weak, but yes. You can see her." Ethan didn't wait for more details. He stood so fast that the chair scraped against the floor, making a sharp sound that no one reacted to. Oliver grabbed the car keys without a word. Claire helped Lily put on her jacket. And before Ethan even realized what was happening, they were already on their way to the hospital. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something faintly floral, like the cheap air fresheners nurses used to mask the scent of medicine. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the silence, rhythmic and constant. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. His mother looked smaller than he remembered. She was pale, her dark hair limp against the pillow. Bruises painted her arms and cheekbone in fading shades of blue and yellow. Her eyes, once full of life, now seemed tired, heavy with something Ethan didn't have a name for. But when she saw him, when she saw them, her entire face changed. Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for them with weak, shaking fingers. "My babies," she whispered. That was all it took. Lily ran to her first, climbing onto the bed carefully, wrapping her tiny arms around their mother's waist. Ethan followed, slower, unsure. Part of him was afraid that if he touched her, she might disappear. But when he reached out, when his fingers brushed against hers, she squeezed his hand as tightly as she could. And suddenly, he wasn't afraid anymore. He was home. Weeks passed. His mom got stronger every day. She wasn't ready to leave the hospital yet, but she was healing. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to believe that things might actually be okay. Not perfect. Not the way they used to be. But okay. Lily was smiling again. Oliver and Claire were real. Not just people who had taken them in, but people who stayed. And his mother, his real mother, the one who had always protected them, always loved them, was still here. Still fighting. One night, as Ethan sat beside her hospital bed, watching her drift off to sleep, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" she murmured. Ethan hesitated, thinking about everything they had lost, everything they had gained. He thought about Oliver and Claire, about how, even when he pushed them away, they never left. He thought about Lily, about how she was finally safe. He thought about his mother, bruised, tired, but alive. He thought about all of it. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think I am." And for the first time, he actually believed it.